Hey there, everyone. This is Melissa at thewaygodintended.com. www.thewaygodintended.com is my blog, and it's about birthing and living naturally and holistically. And I just wanted to share in today's video some more sort of background. I had planned on going ahead and doing a video on the big dreams that we have about the homestead we want to do. And in the last video I did was some history on our homesteading. But I think today what I'd rather do is sort of give a little bit of history about our birthing and living naturally, which is what my blog is actually based on originally, which is kind of how I got started in part of the holistic living, I would say. So my husband and I got married, and one of the things we talked about before we got married actually was homeschooling, which is another thing that we're actually currently doing. Our oldest is 8, and she's currently somewhere between second and third grade, which is the cool thing about homeschooling because it doesn't have to literally exactly be like an actual grade level. As long as they're sort of tracking where they're supposed to be, it is completely normal and completely fine, from what I've found out. To sort of be at that sort of in between. We're not really sure quite what grade she's in. But she's the oldest. She's 8. We started her in kindergarten a couple years back. Actually, the homeschooling is a whole another thing on its own, but actually I can do another video on that at some point too. But we also have a 7-year-old almost son who's in like kindergarten, first grade, and then we have a 4.5-year-old who's sort of doing pre-K stuff, and we have a 2-year-old. She's going to be 2 in a couple of weeks, and they're all just learning and growing and soaking up knowledge like little sponges. But what I wanted to talk about was the birthing aspect, and basically like the aspect of having babies, kind of. I learned so much during the process of having my pregnancies and births, and I really wanted it to be something I could share as a resource with other people. So that's really where my blog was sort of born. On our 2nd year anniversary after my husband and I got married, we found out we were pregnant with our first. Actually, we were in Baltimore, Maryland when we found out, which was actually kind of funny since we're actually in Maryland right now. So we had moved from Florida to Maryland about a year and a month and a half ago. But before all of that, when Ken and I were first talking about what, lifestyle goals and things like that before we got married, is sort of our premarital discussions, we had talked about doing holistic and natural rather than sort of Western medicine style birthing, which really translates to I'd rather have a midwife than an OB-GYN. I would rather have my baby in a setting of my choosing rather than an actual hospital if possible. Trying to see if there's any other... Those are sort of the basic differences between sort of home birthing or natural, is in the sense of using like a birthing center, as opposed to the traditional, very very much in our country, traditional Western medicine where you go to an OB, and usually that OB is also your gynecologist, and then they're sort of your doctor for your women stuff. So they keep track of your health before you have babies and in between having babies, and then when you have a baby they're usually your doctor for that as well. That's usually what an OB-GYN is. I got all checked out before I ever met Ken, and I also had one last real good checkup before we got married, and then I had planned on switching to a GYN sort of closer to where we were living at the time, but then when we got pregnant, and he and I had been talking about it so much that we decided to try going through a local birthing center instead. And a couple of the reasons was, we had talked about doing more natural before we got married, and another reason was I actually had met through our group at church. We knew, I met the brother first when I was in college group, and he was born at home. And his sister actually started going to our group after I got married to my husband, and was the sister of that particular guy that I knew in college, and she was also a person who was born at home, and their mother was very much into home birthing, and I got a lot of experience from hearing stories that they were given by their mother about those experiences and how safe it was, and how when they had kids, when they got married, they were going to do the same thing. And I was like, wow. And then interestingly, I actually met a midwife at one of my husband's. Was going to a church in Sarasota at the time in Florida, and Bradenton, which is like literally the counties are next to each other, so the towns or cities are right next to each other. His home was in Bradenton. I was born and raised in Sarasota, so I was somewhat familiar with Bradenton before I married him. But they had started a sister church in Bradenton, and one of the functions that they were having as a church, they had a midwife attending, doing, as a women's, I think it was a women's group or something like that, and I met her there and got to talk to her and ask her some questions, which also helped me feel more comfortable. And on top of all of that, my husband, actually his mom, had, I believe, 2 or 3 of his siblings that are younger than him at home with a midwife as well. So, I mean, the experience on my side and his side was like, okay, so we've seen this, we've heard about this, we're interested in this, let's check it out. So before we got pregnant, within like probably a year or so of our first year and of getting married, about a year into, we checked it out. We got a tour. We got to talk to people there. We liked it. We liked the people we talked to. I think we met 1 or 2 of the midwives. We met one of the assistants was probably in the office at the time doing the office work. So it was a really nice environment and was very comfortable with it. And so was my husband. Once we did get pregnant and we found out on our 2-year anniversary trip, we went back right away and started talking to them about all the details and things like that. And I won't get into all of that because it's somewhat complicated and there's like a lot, and that my goal is to sort of give a brief history, not like the whole detailed thing. But if anyone ever does leave comments on this particular post, or this video, ask away, and I'll, try to answer those questions, or maybe do videos more in depth if anyone's interested in how those sort of things went down. My mom was very confused at first. She didn't understand that they were going to do all the same things that an OB does. So she thought I needed the OB for all the prenatal care, when in fact, that's what the midwives do. They do all your prenatal care, they do the delivery, and then they do all your postnatal care, just like your OB would. So it's sort of in place of the Western medicine OB. And I say Western medicine as in, it's very broad and sort of means all of that. We were able to have our first 3 children at home. So we had Miranda and Kaylin and Sophia all in the same, 1, 2, 3, all in the same pool. We got a little kiddie pool that we got to use. So we did a water birth, all 3 of them, as well as at home. And it was a really very unique experience being able to be in the comfort of my own home and have my kids. It's hard to describe, it's hard to explain, except that it was I felt very safe. And I had really good relationships with the midwives by this time. We had a history with them, going into it after the first one. So lucky for me, I got to have the same midwife, the first 2 babies. She had actually moved in between the first 2 babies and came back for the other midwife's birth as well. She was attending her birth. So I got to have that privilege. And then our 3rd baby, she was my fastest. And I think I had I believe it was a student midwife at the time that was actually training to sign on with the birthing center. So she sort of got back up from the other, midwife, the owner. Unique, all 3 completely different and unique experiences. But we learned so much. And one of the best things that I really enjoyed about having my babies through this birthing center was they're really excellent, and I mean very excellent, birth education classes. It was paid for when you pay for everything to go through the birthing center, part of that goes towards the birthing classes. And they're actually pretty pricey if you don't go through the birthing center. It's like $80 a class, I think, or something like that. If you go outside of that, like if you're having your baby, in the hospital instead, or with an OB, or even just hiring a midwife from somewhere, if you're wanting just the education classes, they can get a little pricey. But they were included for us. And every baby we had, we went through every class, every time, as much as we possibly could, because it turned into date night for us as well. And we were able to share experience after we had our first one. We were able to glean a lot of experience during the first one and then share experiences after that for, baby 2, 3, and 4. We didn't actually birth our fourth at home or even at the birthing center. She decided to be transverse. She didn't go head down most of the last part of the pregnancy, and then we got her head down, and then she didn't engage, so we had to sign out of care and actually did have to go through the hospital and through a doctor there and have her at Sarasota Memorial, which coincidentally was the same hospital I was born at. So that's sort of our special thing with our fourth, which of course my mom was super excited about that too. So that's sort of the brief history of kind of what we were doing with that, and we found it very non-invasive to go through the birthing center. They were not necessarily interested in doing a lot of invasive testing or procedures. They were very, they wanted you to go through chiropractic during pregnancy and afterwards, and even have your baby do it, which is a whole nother video and post on the blog about, chiropractic and babies and prenatal and all that. It's so safe and it's super healthy. So, there's that part of holistic living as well. And using herbs and natural alternatives to actually like prescription medications and, over-the-counter pain relievers and all of that. So it was just a nice, refreshing, wow, I can live and use things that God already made when He created the world, which is the way God intended, which is the whole point of the name of the blog, having your babies, living your life, taking care of yourself, healing yourself, being, personal grooming, all of that with things already, here that, rather than making things synthetically, creating drugs that mimic nature. That's the whole point for the blog, was to be able to do that in life and sort of share my experience of how, that worked or didn't work, or, what happened. So like a couple examples like my son got some ant bites at one point, or my daughter, one of the two. Well, actually they both have, but I think the one that I actually literally blogged about on my blog, she had got bit, I think, by some ants. And we were, I didn't see what kind they were. She didn't really talk about them too much until like the next day when they started puffing up and she was having what looked like some kind of allergic reaction. And I was able to look up some stuff online holistically and use things we already had. The pediatrician we called just to sort of be on the safe side, talked to her, and she suggested going ahead and going with Benadryl. But on top of going with Benadryl, I scaled back on how much Benadryl I gave her. And then we gave foods that were high in histamines, like plums. Black plums are pretty high in that. Black cherries or dark red cherries. Any like fruit like that with that dark skin apparently is very high in histamine. So I did some research and I found out about it, and I gave that to her. And then my son had similar situation where he was having issues with some bites, and same thing. Another side note is apparently capers are extremely high. They're the highest food with histamine properties. We don't really care for capers though, sadly. But if push came to shove and we were really, really gonna not go with like taking Benadryl or whatever, I would definitely be trying to find a way to feed them capers, probably like in hummus or something. I'd probably really try to find a way to do that if that's, the route we wanted to go. We do tend to err on the safe side when it comes to stuff like that, because I just don't want to have any death or anything like that occur due to anaphylactic shock, which is, the throat closing up or things like that when you're having an allergic reaction. I had asthma as a kid, and I just don't want to play around with that. So until I'm like really good with the holistic natural stuff. I will still lean a little bit on the Western medicine side if I have to. Things that I know are going to work, like Benadryl. So that's sort of how that went, has gone. Another example might be, let's see, I don't know, like a really good one is just in general using essential oils and things like that for massage, or just, rather than drinking 5 cups of coffee. Magnesium supplementation is actually really huge. It can help with your sleep deprivation and things like that. And I had no idea that that was a symptom of magnesium deprivation, was like really bad sleep and stuff. So I just was able to learn things like that, natural things that help your body do the things they're supposed to already be doing. So it's amazing. Turmeric, finding out when I had candida issue, finding out that turmeric is huge for helping with like joint pain and arthritic type pain. I had absolutely no idea. And I also didn't know that candida caused brain fog and inflammation in your joints and things like that, and headaches and all kinds of stuff. I had no idea because it had never come up before. And so here I was thinking that I was having, deprivation of sleep because I just had a baby and I was kind of depressed about that anyway. So I just thought maybe I had some hormonal imbalance on top of that. And it turns out I had the yeast overgrowth, which is what candida is. And that a lot of just changing my diet to sort of cut that sugar out and get that back under control. Oh my gosh, I could actually think and not have so much brain fog. And I was sleeping better. And again, all natural stuff. Seriously. And I just want to share those types of things because to me that's really important if you're really looking for that lifestyle, rather than continuing to put a bunch of man-made stuff in your body. And your body's not meant to use that. So then it's like, what do I do with this? Oh, okay, well, I'll store it in some fat, I guess. And you have all these really horrible side effects. And, it's not really worth it in my opinion. So that's sort of just a brief background on how the blog was born and how I sort of started out with all of this. And now, what I want to do is continue with that with some homesteading, add homesteading in there and homeschooling and sort of expand on, what we're doing and, just leave you with some results so you can sort of see what's worked for us, what hasn't. And again, this is not for everybody. Everybody's different, and what works for me might not work for you. So that's the whole point, is to just share my results and if you want to try it or do the same thing, great. If you have questions, I would love to answer questions. So again, hope you're having a blessed day, and I'll see you next time.